And good morning, everyone. My name is Sunshine Day, and I am the spiritual living coach to people who are wanting to live their best life. In particular, I love working with people in recovery, people who are ready to give up those weapons of mass distraction, whether they're drugs, alcohol, sex, gambling, debting, overeating, undereating, whether it is drama, anxiety, or stress. Good morning, Greg. It's so good to have you with us this morning. Thank you so much for tuning in. You know, I am so excited to be here with you today because I just kind of want to ask a question and want to invite you to type in what you think your response is. And what is the difference between the brain and the mind? I know that we use those interchangeably. Is there a difference between the brain and the mind? And then, I really want to just kind of like dive into how we use the brain, the mind to actually help us to move forward, how we actually use this thing that is up in here to move us forward, not only in recovery, right? Because, yeah, the show is called A Spiritual Remedy, and it's another episode of A Spiritual Remedy, but it is indeed a spiritual remedy because most folks are suffering from a spiritual malady, from a spiritual sickness, and it doesn't matter if, in fact, if you are someone in recovery or not, most folks have this spiritual malady. Okay, so back to the mind and the brain. Is there a difference? And so what I want to share with you is that yes, indeed, there is a difference. There is a difference between the brain and the mind. And even though people use it interchangeably, you cannot you cannot really move forward. Well, you can, of course, we can move forward in ignorance all the time, but who wants to live like that, right? The deal is that the brain is the physical thing itself. It is that mass that is here in the head part, right? It is that gray matter. It's made up of all the blood vessels and the nerve cells, and it's got a definite shape and structure. And when you see pictures of it, you can say, oh yeah, well, that's the brain because it has a definite shape and structure. And the purpose of the brain, or what the brain does, is that it has the ability to coordinate movements and feelings because of these nerve endings, because of the blood vessels that are moving through, and it has control over the different functions of the body, right? And then you can touch the brain. You can physically open the skull and touch the brain. Now, the mind, however, is a mental thing. I like to call the mind like the screen at the movie theater. It is what gets projected upon, right? And it's not made up of anything. It is, you can't touch it. It's not tangible, and it's actually, some people might call it hypothetical, um, but it doesn't have a defined structure, and you can't touch it. So because you can't touch it, it's a mental thing, and yet it's such a powerful instrument that we get to use. So our mind is also referred to sometimes by folks as our conscience, or for spiritual folks, it is also it is consciousness. And it is the way consciousness, the ability to interact with all of life, that is that ability. And so, why am I making a big difference? Hey, Nancy, good to have you. Good morning. Why am I making the distinction between the brain and the mind? Well, what happens is this: for humanity, our brain is locked up behind this skull, and this skull is pretty hard. I've been called hard-headed, and that's because that is the job of the skull, is to protect the brain, because it does so much and it controls the body function. But who I am is spirit. Who I am is spirit, and I have a body and I have a brain. Okay? Who I am is spirit, and I have a body, and my body has a brain. My body has this thing here. Now, when the outside sensory went on my hands, my eyes, my ears, my smell, my taste, my sensations, I get an opportunity to process that through the brain. That's information that goes to the brain. And the brain actually then paints these pictures, which are in my imagination, which are in my mind. So it's interesting that at times I create stories. Oftentimes I create stories about who you are, or about who I am, or about the world around me, based on these sensories, based on reading the newspaper, reading a book, watching the news, watching television, based on all of this information that I'm constantly getting. I'm constantly getting information, and my brain processes it to the best of its ability. And yet with all of that, I make up stuff. I make up stuff to protect myself. I make up stuff to have a good time. I make up stuff to simply live and survive. And so the distinction for me, and I would love to hear from some of you what you think the distinction is, and how knowing the difference between the two, how it supports your daily living, how it supports your spiritual life, how it supports how you do anything in life. And so, for me, this distinction is important, because when I think about addiction, I think about how I've, in the past and even now, how I get stuck in beliefs and behaviors that no longer serve me, that no longer support me, that are no longer for my highest good, whether it's something around food, or whether it's something around drugs or alcohol, whether it's something around my health and fitness, and whether it's something around my education or my growth. I still have beliefs, and maybe beliefs that I'm stuck in, but I'm willing to look at, right? Stuck in beliefs and behaviors that no longer serve me. What are those for you? And that those beliefs and those behaviors actually cut me off, or that they distract me from consciousness. They distract me from the spirit of who I am. They distract me from knowing my best and my highest. Good morning, Mahogany. I love you, beloved. It's so good to still connect with you after all of these years. So when I think about the brain and the mind, in spiritual circles, we talk about the mind of the infinite, that is the way the infinite actually speaks to us in a language that we understand. That when we connect with consciousness, when we connect to the truth and to the center and to the core of who we are, that it is then that we're living our best life. Now, a lot of recovery programs, want you to have this connection with this source, with this power, with this I am presence. And it's important, because sometimes, the stinking thinking gets in the way. The stinking thinking, those thoughts and beliefs and the things that we make up, it gets in the way of us actually living our full life. And so, what are you going to believe? What are you going to believe? Are you going to believe the stuff that you make up, or are you going to go beyond that to that indwelling power and presence that is your life, that is life itself? It is that thing that animates you, and then make the connection there. Make the connection there to know that right where you are whole, perfect, and complete. And you might say, how can I be whole, perfect, and complete when I'm suffering from addiction, or when you said I was stuck in beliefs and behaviors? Even in the funk, you are whole, perfect, and complete. It does not take away from who you are at your core and at your center. The idea is to strip away from all of the things that we've been told about ourselves, to lay down the weapons of mass distraction, meaning the drugs, the booze, the alcohol, the sex, the gambling, the dating, those things that are distraction, that distract us from the truth of who we are. The mind uses the brain. Thank you, Greg. The mind uses the brain, and the brain responds to the mind. You can't have one without the other. The mind uses the brain, and the brain responds to the mind. So it's interesting that consciousness uses the brain. So when you come into spiritual communities that are not necessarily religious and dogmatic, for instance, like Centers for Spiritual Living, when you come into spiritual communities like a Center for Spiritual Living, they don't teach you what to think. Instead, they teach you how to think, so that we allow the mind of the infinite, that infinite intelligence that is right where we are, allows that mind to use the brain. And then the brain calculates, determines, does what it does physically. And that's how it uses the information from the mind, from consciousness. So how do we develop that? Because there are ways to, of course, train the brain, right? We can always train the brain. I know that we train the brain with children. My brain was trained. Sometimes I call it brainwashing, depending on whether I like it or not. But we train the brain, right? We teach children. I was taught how to brush my teeth. I was trained how to sit in a chair. I don't think about it now. I don't have to think like, oh, I'm getting this bicuspid and I'm getting this molar, and I don't have to do that anymore. As a matter of fact, I consciously use my teeth brushing experience as a way to affirm my life. I'll tell you about that a little bit. But we train ourselves and we train our brain, and then what happens is it goes on automatic pilot, right? That then, now that I know how to do it, boom, 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 I can go through it relatively quickly and make sure that I'm getting all of the areas of my mouth and teeth that need to be cleaned. We're taught and we're trained how to sit. And depending on whether you've had someone in your life that was about posture and sitting correctly with a straight spine, or even when you're learning how to meditate, depending on what school you go to learn how to meditate, they want an erect spine and sit up and the chin at a particular place and your hands right? So we can train the brain to have us be in a particular mindset. We train the brain to help us be in a mindset. Okay, brain, I'm getting ready to meditate now. The mindset that I want is a Zen mindset, or quiet down. It's time to just not think of anything, to just bring my attention to my breath. Good morning, Michelle. I'm so glad you're tuning in. And when we begin to train the brain, the mind is able to flood us, in fact, with life affirming isness. I don't even know what to call it. With life. The mind floods us with life. This joy, this peace, this abundance, this power, presence. We begin to feel what it really means to be alive. We get present in the moment. And that's why knowing the difference between the brain and the mind, and then how to use them for our highest good, is so key and so important. What is the default? Where do you have your default set? That's another reason to know the difference. So when things don't go your way, is your default, forget it then. I'm going to just go drink. Or I'm going to just go and be mad in the corner and pout. What is your default? We can reset the default by training ourselves to recognize and to know that our life is life itself. Did you know that? Did you know that your life is life? That right where you are, the power, the presence, the love, the peace, the perfection, the freedom of God, of the utmost intelligence, of the infinite intelligence, that it is right there where you are. That you don't have to go to the mountaintop to find it. That you don't have to go to the deep bottom of the deep blue sea to find it, but that it is right where you are. And when we begin to train the brain to slow down for a moment, to be still, to be silent, and we begin to not allow ourselves to be run by our brain, but indeed the mind, the infinite intelligence that speaks to us via the mind, being that infinite intelligence that is living us, that consciousness, that when we build and allow consciousness to be our guide, that it is then that we live our amazing life. It is then that we live fully. I mean, and that's what I call it. But I think we're always living fully, even if it's fully jacked up. Did I say that? It's still fully, because it's not like half-ass, right? It's still fully. But for me, when I think about living my best life, or the life of my dreams, which is really like the life of my consciousness, like really like being in the joy, being in that place of like, I love my life. I know when I was in the throes of my addiction, I wasn't loving my life. I did in the beginning. It was like, yeah, this is fun. Woo! And I was just like in the nod, or in the hype, or in whatever it was that I was doing at the time. And then it got old. It was like, no, man, I had to hustle. I had to grind just to get that same feeling. And I recognized that I wasn't living my life to the fullest potential that I possibly could. And even now on this road, what is my fullest potential? Am I there? Can I get there? And so it's interesting to be able to train myself to utilize the brain, to utilize the mind, to utilize consciousness, to make that conscious contact through the practice of meditation, through the practice of being still and being silent, and slowing down. Through this indwelling connection, recognize who I really am. My real ID is not on my California driver's license. My real ID is that right where I am, life is. I love you, Jeanette. I like that this is your Monday practice. So I want to leave you with this, that there is a difference between the brain and the mind. Consciousness is really who you are. And that as you begin to train your brain to slow down, be still, be silent, that you allow the mind of the infinite, the mind of the creative intelligence, the mind of life, consciousness itself, to really be your guide. That's my GPS. And through my practice of meditation or of just being still and silent for just a minute or two, I allow myself to make better choices for my life and in my life. And for someone who's in recovery, that is important. It's important to be able to put things in place that help me. So if you have something in place, excellent. Continue to use it. Continue to develop it. If you don't have something in place, I would love to be your spiritual living coach. And I would love to assist you in putting something into place so that it's automatic, so that it's natural, so that you recognize your life as life itself, and that you begin to live a life from a place of power, from a place of peace, and in particular, from a place of joy and freedom. And so make that connection with me at any time. I provide loving support and spiritual tools for your personal transformation, and I'm here to support you. All right, beloveds, thanks for tuning in to another episode of A Spiritual Remedy. Until next week, know that you are loved. Bye for now.